The rain lashed against the polished windows of the sleek, black sedan, blurring the neon glow of the city into streaks of vibrant color. Inside, a silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the rhythmic thud of the wipers. Alara, her dark skin glistening with scattered raindrops, felt a tremor run through her, a mixture of fear and something she couldn't quite name. Across from her, Leaf, the Korean mafia boss, watched her with eyes that held the depth of a winter night sky. He was impossibly handsome, a sharp, chiseled face framed by dark hair, his expensive suit doing little to soften the aura of dangerous power that clung to him. "Don't apologize," he told her softly as the doors locked, the click echoing ominously in the confined space. "Before you skip, just remember, channels like this only survive if you hit subscribe. Otherwise, stories like this one just disappear." Her breath hitched. She hadn't even realized she was about to, but the word had been forming on her lips, a knee-jerk reaction to the chaos that had just unfolded. Moments before, she'd been hurrying home, her mind preoccupied with overdue bills and a looming rent payment, when a sudden, violent screech of tires had ripped through the quiet evening. A dark SUV had careened onto the sidewalk, sending pedestrians scattering. Alara, frozen for a split second, had seen a man in a black mask level a gun at a figure emerging from a high-end club. Her instincts, honed by years of navigating a tough city, had screamed at her to run, but then a hand, surprisingly gentle yet undeniably firm, had gripped her arm, pulling her into the safety of this very car. She was a simple archivist, her days spent among dusty manuscripts and forgotten histories, not dodging bullets on rain-slicked streets. Leaf's gaze held hers, unwavering. There was a challenge there, a silent demand for an explanation she couldn't articulate. She wasn't sure if she was more terrified of the men outside, or of the man who had just saved her. He radiated an authority that was both intimidating and strangely compelling. She knew nothing about him, only that he moved with a quiet, deadly grace, and that the air around him crackled with unspoken power. The car began to move, gliding through the rain-soaked streets, leaving the scene of the almost shooting behind. Alara gripped her purse, her knuckles white. Who are you?" she finally managed, her voice a little more shaky than she would have liked. He offered no immediate answer, simply a slight tilt of his head, a gesture that was both dismissive and intrigued. But I still didn't know who he truly was. Days turned into a surreal blur. Leaf had insisted she stay in a penthouse apartment she could only dream of affording, a gilded cage with panoramic views of the city. He claimed it was for her protection, that the men who had targeted him might come after her as a witness. Alara knew, deep down, that it was also a way to keep her close, to control her. He would visit, always unannounced, always at odd hours. He spoke little, but his presence was a heavy weight in the opulent rooms. During one of these visits, as she stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights twinkle below, he finally revealed a piece of his world. "They call me the Shadow King," he'd said, his voice low, almost a whisper against the hum of the city. "And what you saw, that was just a small glimpse of the shadows I command." The realization hit her then, cold and sharp. He wasn't just a powerful man, he was the power, the unseen hand that moved pieces on the city's dark chessboard. He explained, with a chilling detachment, that his organization had been targeted, and that her accidental presence had made her a liability, but also, paradoxically, a temporary asset. She was a variable he couldn't risk letting out into the open, not yet. The initial fear began to intertwine with a strange, undeniable magnetism. His sharp intelligence, the subtle way his eyes would follow her every movement, the unexpected moments of quiet intensity when their gazes met, it all chipped away at her resolve to remain aloof. She found herself noticing the way his expensive cologne lingered in a room after he left, the effortless confidence in his stride, the faint scar above his left eyebrow that hinted at past battles. He revealed, almost reluctantly, that the men who attacked him were a rival faction attempting to destabilize his operations, and that her safety was now linked to his. She was under his protection, whether she liked it or not. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It helps us bring you more captivating tales like this one. The tension between them grew, a silent, simmering current beneath the surface of their forced proximity. One evening, as the city slept, a sudden alarm blared through the penthouse. Leaf, moving with terrifying speed, pushed Alara behind a reinforced wall panel. "Stay here," he commanded. His voice devoid of all softness, replaced by a steely edge. Footsteps thudded outside, and then the muffled sounds of a struggle. Fear gripped Alara, but through it, she saw something new in him, a raw, primal protectiveness that was both terrifying and deeply moving. He wasn't just protecting an asset, he was protecting her. When he returned, a slight cut bleeding above his temple, his tailored suit disheveled, he looked at her with an intensity that made her heart pound. "They got in through a back channel," he gritted out, his jaw tight. A betrayal from within. He confessed, his voice barely audible, that he had trusted the wrong person, a mistake that had nearly cost him everything, including her. It was a rare glimpse into his vulnerability, a crack in his impenetrable facade. "What happened that night changed my destiny. Forever." The confrontation had been swift, brutal, and utterly silent. Alara had pressed herself against the cold steel of the hidden panel, her ears straining, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd heard the sharp, metallic clang of something heavy hitting the floor, a choked gasp, and then the chilling thud of a body. When Leaf had emerged, his presence filled the opulent space with a coiled danger that was almost palpable. The cut on his temple, a thin line of crimson against his dark skin, only intensified his formidable aura. He hadn't just protected her, he had eliminated the threat with a ruthless efficiency that spoke volumes about his world. His admission of betrayal, whispered in the aftermath, had been a stark revelation. For the first time, she saw beyond the impenetrable facade, glimpsed the man beneath the king. He was not infallible, not entirely invulnerable. He had trusted, and that trust had been violated, leaving a raw wound that resonated with a loneliness she hadn't expected. The next few days were a strange blend of heightened vigilance and an almost suffocating intimacy. The breach had shaken Leaf, making him even more possessive of her presence. He rarely left her alone, even for short periods. Their meals were taken in the penthouse, often in silence, punctuated by the clinking of silverware and the distant hum of the city. Yet, in those silences, a new language began to form between them. Their eyes would meet across the polished table, holding for a beat longer than necessary, a silent acknowledgement of the danger they shared, and the unspoken connection that was steadily deepening. He would sometimes catch her gaze as she read, a rare, almost tender look in his eyes that made her breath catch. He was still the Shadow King, but around her, the shadows seemed to soften, to recede just a fraction. One afternoon, as the sun streamed into the penthouse, casting long shadows across the marble floor, Alara found herself drawn to his study. He was there, immersed in documents, his brow furrowed in concentration. She watched him. For a moment, the sharp angles of his face, the powerful set of his shoulders. "Leaf," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. He looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers, a flicker of surprise in their depths. I can't just sit here. I need to understand." He leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, deliberate movement. "Understand what, Alara?" His voice was low, a velvet rumble that always sent a shiver down her spine. "Everything. Your world. Why you keep me here, beyond just protection. She walked closer, her gaze unwavering. I'm not a child, Leaf. I can handle the truth. A muscle twitched in his jaw. He studied her, a long, assessing look that felt like it peeled back layers of her soul. Finally, he sighed, a sound of weary resignation. The man who betrayed me, his name is Kian. He was, like a brother. He believed I was becoming soft, losing my edge. He thought by destabilizing my operations, he could take over, restore what he saw as the old ways. Leaf paused, his gaze drifting to the panoramic view of the city. He knew I had a weakness, something I would protect above all else. He didn't know what that was, but he saw my sudden interest in you, an outsider, as a potential leverage point. The air crackled with unspoken tension. He was admitting that she had become his weakness, a vulnerability he hadn't known he possessed. It was a confession wrapped in a warning. Alara felt a jolt of both fear and a strange validation. She wasn't just a witness, she was a focal point in his dangerous world. So, I'm bait, she asked, her voice laced with a bitter edge. Leaf's eyes snapped back to hers, a flash of something akin to anger. Never. You are under my protection. Always. Kian miscalculated. He thought he could use you against me. What he didn't realize is that by threatening you, he solidified my resolve to destroy him. The intensity in his voice was absolute, leaving no room for doubt. It was a promise, a declaration that sent a wave of heat through her. He would burn the world down for her, and the thought, terrifying as it was also undeniably alluring. She spent the next few days not just observing, but actively seeking information. She listened to his hushed phone calls, pieced together fragments of conversations, and even, daringly, used a secure tablet he'd given her to research the intricate web of power and influence that defined his empire. She learned about the districts he controlled, the legitimate businesses that masked darker dealings, the subtle codes and hierarchies. The world she'd been pulled into was vast and complex, far more than simple street violence. It was a game of strategy, loyalty, and ruthless ambition. And Leaf, the quiet, brooding man who protected her, was its undisputed master. One evening, as Alara was sketching in a notebook, a habit she'd picked up to channel her nervous energy, Leaf entered the living area. He stopped, watching her, a rare softness in his eyes. You're good, he murmured, stepping closer. He looked over her shoulder at the intricate drawing of the city skyline, a blend of sharp angles and soft lights. You see things others miss. Their proximity was electric. She could feel the warmth of his body, the subtle scent of his cologne. Her hand trembled slightly as she continued to draw. It's how I cope, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. It's how I make sense of the chaos. He reached out, his finger gently tracing the line of her jaw, a feather-light touch that sent shivers through her. There's no chaos with me, Alara. Only order. And protection. The words were a promise, a claim, and a challenge all at once. Her breath hitched. She met his gaze, her heart thrumming a frantic rhythm against her ribs. His eyes, usually so guarded, held a raw intensity that mirrored the burgeoning feelings within her. The air between them was thick with unspoken desires, a fragile bridge forming over the chasm of their vastly different worlds. She knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that she was no longer merely a witness, no longer just a liability. She was becoming something more, something intrinsically linked to him, to this dangerous, opulent existence. The next morning, the city hummed with a renewed sense of purpose. Leaf had been up before dawn, his presence a constant, reassuring anchor in the vast penthouse. Alara found him in his study, a mug of steaming black coffee in his hand, his gaze fixed on a holographic display that projected intricate maps and data. He looked up as she entered, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "Sleep well?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that always managed to soothe her frayed nerves. "As well as can be expected," she replied, a small smile playing on her own lips. The truth was, she hadn't slept. Her mind had raced with the implications of his confession, the weight of his protection, and the undeniable pull she felt towards him. She walked over, drawn by an invisible force, and stood beside him, peering at the glowing display. "What is all this?" He gestured to the map, a complex network of illuminated lines and nodes. "This is Kian's reach. His operations. He's been attempting to consolidate power in the eastern districts, leveraging old loyalties." His tone was devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to the raw vulnerability he'd shown her just days before. This was the Shadow King, strategizing, calculating. "And what's your strategy?" she asked, her gaze sweeping across the intricate display. She was surprised by her own interest, by the way her mind was beginning to grasp the complex machinations of his world. He turned to her, his eyes locking with hers. "To dismantle it. Piece by piece. Without unnecessary bloodshed." He paused, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. "And to ensure your safety throughout." A warmth spread through Alara, a quiet acknowledgement of his unwavering commitment. She knew the danger was real, that Kian was a formidable opponent, but with Leaf, she felt an inexplicable sense of security. It was a dangerous illusion, perhaps, but one she was increasingly willing to embrace. The resistance she'd initially felt, the fierce independence that had defined her, was slowly, irrevocably crumbling under the weight of his presence. Days bled into weeks. The penthouse, once a gilded cage, now felt more like a sanctuary. Leaf's visits became less about surveillance and more about shared moments. He would tell her stories of the city, not of its underworld, but of its hidden gems, its forgotten histories, its vibrant pulse. He discovered her love for art, for literature, and would often bring her rare books or take her to private viewings at exclusive galleries, always with a subtle, unobtrusive security detail. These excursions, carefully orchestrated, were a testament to his desire to integrate her into his world, not just as a protected asset, but as a valued companion. One rainy evening, as they sat in his private library, surrounded by towering shelves of ancient texts and modern masterpieces, he asked her, "What do you truly want, Alara?" His voice was soft, barely a whisper against the gentle patter of rain against the windows. She looked up from the illuminated manuscript she was examining, her heart skipping a beat. It was the first time he had asked her such a personal question, one that didn't revolve around her safety or his business. "Freedom," she admitted, her voice equally soft. "To live my life on my own terms." She paused, then added, almost reluctantly, "But I don't know if that's possible anymore." He closed the book he was holding, his gaze intense. "It is. But it must be freedom within a new framework. A framework I can provide. One where you are safe, respected, and free to pursue whatever you desire." He reached across the antique table, his hand covering hers, a gesture of profound intimacy. His touch sent a jolt through her, a current of longing and fear, of hope and apprehension. "I won't keep you prisoner, Alara. But I won't let you walk into danger either." The discovery phase of their relationship was giving way to something far more complex, a conflict of desires and loyalties. She was torn between the independent life she craved and the undeniable allure of his powerful, protective world. She saw the subtle ways he adapted for her, the small concessions he made, the quiet moments of vulnerability he allowed himself in her presence. He was changing, evolving, and she, in turn, felt a profound shift within herself. One afternoon, a message arrived, encrypted and urgent. Leaf's face, usually so composed, tightened with a grim resolve. Kian has made his move, he announced, his voice clipped. He's targeting one of my key distribution hubs, a legitimate front that handles a significant portion of our legal exports. Alara felt a sudden chill. This wasn't just about abstract power struggles, it was about real-world consequences, about people whose livelihoods depended on Leaf's operations. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. He met her gaze, his eyes hard. "I'm going to stop him. And this time I'm not playing by his rules." He paused, his eyes softening slightly. "I need you to stay here, Alara. Under no circumstances are you to leave the penthouse." But Alara, emboldened by their growing connection, by the understanding she now had of his world, shook her head. "No," she said, her voice firm. "I won't. Not this time." She walked towards him, her determination shining in her eyes. "I'm not a passive observer anymore, Leaf. I'm part of this. Before you skip, just remember, channels like this only survive if you hit subscribe. Otherwise, stories like this one just disappear. I'm part of this. And I'm coming with you." Her words hung in the air, a defiant challenge to his authority, yet also a testament to the depth of her commitment. Leaf stared at her, his expression a complex mix of surprise, frustration, and a flicker of something akin to admiration. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his skin. He was accustomed to obedience, to his commands being absolute. But Alara was not just anyone. She was the woman who had seen past his facade, the one who had dared to challenge him, and in doing so, had carved a space for herself in his guarded world. He knew the risks, the inherent dangers of bringing her into the heart of a conflict. But he also saw the unyielding resolve in her eyes, a strength that mirrored his own. To deny her now would be to deny a fundamental part of who she had become, and perhaps, a fundamental part of what they were becoming. He let out a slow, measured breath. "It will be dangerous, Alara. More dangerous than anything you've witnessed." His voice was low, a warning, wrapped in a reluctant acceptance. "I understand," she replied, her voice steady, unwavering. "But I can't just sit here and wait. Not anymore." He studied her for another long moment, his dark eyes searching hers, as if looking for any hint of wavering. Finding none, he finally nodded, a curt, decisive gesture. "Very well. But you follow my every instruction. No questions, no hesitation. Understood?" "Understood," she affirmed, a wave of adrenaline coursing through her. She was terrified, yes, but also exhilarated. This was her choice, her active step into a world she had once desperately tried to avoid. The target was a sprawling warehouse complex near the docks, a legitimate shipping operation that served as a crucial node in Leaf's network. The rain had intensified, a relentless downpour that blurred the city lights and made the asphalt gleam under the sporadic flashes of lightning. Leaf's armored vehicle, a sleek black beast, cut through the night, its tinted windows offering a distorted view of the chaotic urban landscape. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic hum of the engine and the crackle of a two-way radio. Alara sat beside Leaf, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She wore a dark, practical outfit he had provided, a stark contrast to her usual vibrant attire. The weight of a hidden comms earpiece in her ear felt alien, yet strangely empowering. Leaf, in his usual dark suit, looked as formidable as ever, but she noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his gaze constantly swept the passing streets, assessing, calculating. "Kian has always been a strategist," Leaf murmured, his voice cutting through the silence. "He won't just hit the hub. He'll try to create chaos, draw attention, hoping to force my hand." As they approached the docks, the air grew thick with the scent of salt and diesel. The warehouse complex, massive and imposing, loomed out of the rain-swept darkness. Lights flickered erratically within, suggesting a struggle already underway. Leaf barked orders into his comms, his voice sharp and authoritative. Team Alpha, secure the perimeter. Team Beta, prepare for entry. I want minimal collateral damage. He turned to Alara, his eyes serious. You stay with me. No matter what happens, you do not stray. The vehicle pulled to a halt in a secluded alleyway, offering a vantage point of the main entrance. The rain hammered against the roof, creating a deafening rhythm. Just as they prepared to disembark, a blinding flash erupted from the warehouse, followed by a concussive boom that rattled the vehicle. Smoke billowed from a section of the roof, illuminated by the frantic strobes of emergency lights that had just begun to arrive in the distance. He's trying to burn it down, Alara gasped, her eyes wide with alarm. He doesn't just want to disrupt, he wants to destroy. Leaf's face was grim. He wants to cripple me. But he underestimates my resolve. He threw open the door, stepping out into the deluge. Alara followed, the cold rain instantly soaking her hair and clothes. The scene was chaotic. Figures moved in the shadows, sporadic shouts echoing over the din of the rain and distant sirens. Leaf moved with an almost predatory grace, his presence radiating an undeniable authority that seemed to part the chaos around him. They entered the warehouse through a side door, slipping past a skirmish between two groups of armed men. The interior was a cavernous space, filled with towering stacks of crates and the acrid smell of smoke. The air was thick with tension, the sounds of muffled gunfire and crashing objects echoing from deeper within. Alara kept close to Leaf, her senses on high alert. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the backdrop of the unfolding drama. This was real, raw, and terrifying. Yet, a strange sense of clarity settled over her. She was here, by his side, making her own choice. Suddenly, a figure emerged from behind a stack of crates, a glint of metal in his hand. Leaf reacted instantly, pushing Alara behind him, drawing a concealed weapon with fluid precision. The assailant, a burly man with a scarred face, lunged. The confrontation was brutally swift. Leaf disarmed him with a practiced ease, a sharp crack echoing as the man's wrist twisted at an unnatural angle. He then delivered a precise, incapacitating blow, sending the man sprawling to the concrete floor. Leaf didn't even spare him a second glance. He turned to Alara, his eyes intense. Are you hurt? He demanded, his voice rough with concern. No, she breathed, shaking her head. The encounter had been over in seconds, yet it had felt like an eternity. She looked at the unconscious man on the floor, then back at Leaf, a new understanding dawning in her eyes. This was his world, unforgiving and brutal, and he navigated it with a chilling efficiency. The abstract concept of danger had just become very, very real. They pressed deeper into the warehouse, the sounds of the conflict growing louder. Leaf moved with a silent intensity, his senses honed, his movements economical. Alara, despite her fear, found herself matching his pace, her focus sharpened by the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She felt a strange duality, the terror of the situation, yet an undeniable surge of empowerment from being an active participant, from choosing to face this alongside him. Before you skip, just remember, channels like this only survive if you hit subscribe. Otherwise, stories like this one just disappear. They reached a central loading bay, a vast expanse where the main confrontation was unfolding. Leaf's men, a disciplined force, were engaging Kian's operatives. The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and the shouts of men. Leaf, without hesitation, plunged into the fray, a silent force of nature. Alara found herself momentarily stunned by the sheer scale of the conflict, the raw violence of it all. But then she remembered Leaf's words, "You stay with me." She pushed past her shock and followed, staying close to his shadow, her eyes scanning for any threats he might miss. He was a whirlwind of controlled power, his movements precise, his focus absolute. He wasn't just fighting, he was orchestrating, directing his men with subtle gestures and clipped commands through his earpiece. A sudden, sharp crack echoed near her ear, and a shower of sparks erupted from a metal beam just inches away. Alara instinctively ducked, her heart leaping into her throat. Leaf, already aware, spun, his weapon tracking the source. He fired 2 rapid shots, and a figure on a catwalk above crumpled. He didn't look back at her, but his voice, low and urgent through her earpiece, cut through the noise. "Stay low, Alara. Keep moving." She nodded, though he couldn't see her, and pressed herself against a stack of crates, her eyes wide, but surprisingly clear. She wasn't a fighter, but she was a survivor. And she was determined not to be a liability. The battle raged, a symphony of chaos and controlled aggression. Leaf seemed to be everywhere at once, a dark phantom moving through the smoke and shadows. He was a protector, a leader, a force to be reckoned with. And watching him, Alara felt a profound shift in her perception. He wasn't just a powerful man, he was a man capable of immense, dangerous love, a love that manifested as fierce, unwavering protection. The cold exterior he presented to the world was a shield, a necessary armor. But with her, he had allowed glimpses of the man beneath, the one burdened by a traumatic past, the one who craved connection. Suddenly, a series of explosions rocked the far end of the warehouse, sending debris raining down. The structural integrity of the building was compromised. Leaf's voice, sharp with urgency, came through her earpiece. "Kian's men are setting charges. They want to bring the whole thing down. We need to clear out, now." He began to push his way towards her, his eyes scanning the collapsing ceiling. The danger was escalating, the stakes higher than ever. Alara saw a glint of movement from a shadowed corner, a figure aiming a weapon directly at Leaf. Time seemed to slow. Without thinking, without a moment of hesitation, she screamed his name, a desperate, warning cry. Leaf, alerted by her voice, spun, but the shot was already fired. It wasn't aimed at him, not directly. It struck a heavy chain holding a massive cargo container suspended overhead. With a groaning shriek of metal, the chain snapped, and the container began to plummet, directly towards Leaf. Alara's breath caught in her throat. Her mind screamed. She moved. It was pure instinct, a primal surge of protective love. She launched herself forward, tackling Leaf with all her strength, knocking him out of the path of the falling container. They hit the concrete floor just as the colossal metal box slammed down with a deafening crash, showering them with dust and debris, the ground trembling violently beneath them. Leaf groaned, disoriented, his arm wrapped tightly around her as they lay tangled on the floor. He pushed himself up, his eyes scanning her frantically. "Alara, are you hurt?" His voice was raw, laced with a terror she had never heard from him before. He pulled her closer, his hands running over her, checking for injuries. She was bruised, shaken, but otherwise unharmed. "I'm okay," she whispered, her voice trembling, her heart still pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and fierce devotion. You almost," he didn't need her to finish the sentence. He knew. He had seen the container, had felt the proximity of death. And he knew she had saved him. The warehouse was now a cacophony of groaning metal, collapsing structures, and the shouts of men retreating. Leaf's men, having neutralized most of Kian's operatives and secured the remaining valuable assets, were now evacuating. Leaf helped Alara to her feet, his grip on her arm firm, almost possessive. His eyes, usually so guarded, were now wide open, reflecting a profound shock and an even deeper gratitude. "You shouldn't have done that, Alara," he said, his voice a low rumble, but there was no anger in it, only a raw, overwhelming emotion. "You put yourself in danger." "I couldn't just stand there," she retorted, her voice firm despite the lingering tremors in her body. "You would have done the same for me." "I would have," he admitted, his gaze intense, sweeping over her face as if memorizing every detail. The chaos around them faded into a distant hum. In that moment, surrounded by the crumbling remains of the warehouse, amidst the lingering scent of smoke and the sound of retreating footsteps, their world narrowed to just the two of them. He pulled her into a tight embrace, a desperate, almost crushing hug that spoke volumes of his fear and relief. She buried her face in his shoulder, inhaling the familiar scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the metallic tang of gunpowder. This was not a tender embrace, but one born of survival, of a bond forged in the crucible of danger. It was a silent acknowledgement of their intertwined fates. "We need to go," he finally muttered, pulling back slightly, though still keeping her securely within his arm. His voice, though still rough, had regained its usual commanding tone. They moved quickly, following his men out of the collapsing structure. The rain had begun to subside, replaced by a chilling drizzle. The sirens were closer now, a mournful wail cutting through the night. As they emerged into the alleyway where their vehicle awaited, Alara saw the flickering blue and red lights in the distance, a stark reminder of the world outside their immediate conflict. Leaf's men were already loading equipment and securing the perimeter. The operation, though costly, had been a success. Kian's attempt to cripple Leaf's network had been thwarted, but at a significant price. Their ride back to Leaf's penthouse was silent, a stark contrast to the earlier tension. Alara sat beside him, still, feeling the tremors of adrenaline in her limbs. She glanced at Leaf, who stared out the window, his profile etched in the fleeting city lights. The cold mask was back, but she knew now what lay beneath it. She had seen his raw fear, his profound gratitude, his almost desperate protectiveness. The man who had been a distant, enigmatic figure was now undeniably, irrevocably, human. Upon reaching the penthouse, the atmosphere was one of subdued efficiency. Leaf's trusted second-in-command, a man named Thorne, met them at the entrance, his face a mixture of relief and concern. "The damage is contained, Leaf. Kian's men were routed. We're tracking his movements." Leaf nodded curtly, his eyes still on Alara. "Good. Get a team on the structural assessment. I want a full report by morning." He then turned to Alara, his voice softening slightly. "You need to get warm. Thorne, prepare a bath for Alara and have some hot tea brought to her room." Alara felt a strange warmth spread through her at his concern, a stark contrast to the cold she felt from the soaked clothes clinging to her. She nodded, too tired to argue, too overwhelmed to process everything that had happened. As she walked towards her room, she felt Leaf's eyes on her, a silent, possessive gaze that followed her until she was out of sight. Later, wrapped in a thick, plush bathrobe, sipping on fragrant herbal tea, Alara finally allowed herself to truly process the events of the night. The image of the falling container, Leaf's face in that split second of terror, her own instinctive lunge, it replayed in her mind like a vivid, terrifying film. She had made a choice, an active, life-altering decision. She hadn't just witnessed Leaf's world, she had stepped into it, fully and irrevocably. The line between their two lives had dissolved, replaced by a tangled, complex knot that bound them together. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called out, her voice still a little hoarse. Leaf entered, his dark suit now replaced by a simple black t-shirt and dark trousers, his hair still slightly damp from a shower. He looked less formidable, more accessible. He walked over to the window, gazing out at the city lights, a silent, contemplative figure. "Kian is a ghost," he finally said, his voice low, devoid of emotion. "He vanished without a trace. But he won't stay hidden for long. He's underestimated me once too often." Alara set her teacup down. "He almost killed you, Leaf." He turned, his eyes meeting hers, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. "He tried. But he failed. Because of you." He took a step closer, then another, until he was standing directly in front of her. The air between them crackled with an unspoken intensity. "You saved my life, Alara." "You would have done the same for me," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes," he admitted, his eyes never leaving hers. "But you didn't have to. You could have stayed safe. You chose not to." He reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw, his thumb stroking her skin. His touch was electric, sending shivers down her spine. "What happened tonight, it changed things." She leaned into his touch, her gaze locked with his. "I know. I can't let you go back to your old life, Alara," he stated, his voice a low, possessive growl. "Not after this. Not after seeing what you mean to me, what you're willing to risk." Her heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. This was it. The moment of truth. The full, terrifying, exhilarating realization of what their connection truly meant. The choice was no longer about whether to be passive or active, but about whether to fully embrace this dangerous, captivating man and his world. "And what about you, Leaf?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What do I mean to you?" His eyes darkened, revealing a depth of emotion she had only glimpsed before. He lowered his head, his forehead resting against hers. "You are the one light in a world of shadows, Alara. The one thing I never expected, the one thing I can't lose." His lips brushed hers, a feather-light touch that promised so much more. "The one thing I will protect with my last breath." His words, a raw confession, resonated deep within her, echoing the truth she had instinctively felt in the chaos of the warehouse. He was a man accustomed to taking, to commanding, but in that moment, he was offering a part of himself, a vulnerability that transcended his formidable exterior. She could feel the tremor in his hands as they cradled her face, a subtle sign of the profound impact she had on him. The air was thick with unspoken desires, with the weight of their shared near-death experience, and the terrifying, exhilarating prospect of a future intertwined. She closed her eyes, letting his confession wash over her, allowing herself to finally acknowledge the magnetic pull that had drawn her to him from their very first encounter. It wasn't just physical attraction, it was a soul-deep recognition, a dangerous understanding that they were two halves of an improbable whole. When her eyes fluttered open, they met his, and in their depths, she saw not just desire, but a profound, almost desperate need. This man, who commanded an empire with an iron fist, was laying bare his soul, his fear of losing her more potent than any threat from his enemies. "I don't want to go back, Leaf," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but firm with conviction. "Not if it means leaving you." The words were a leap of faith, a complete surrender to the tempestuous current that had swept her into his world. It was a choice she knew would redefine everything, severing ties with the familiar and embracing a destiny she could never have imagined. A flicker of relief, so subtle it might have been missed by anyone else, crossed Leaf's face. He tightened his grip on her, pulling her closer until their bodies were pressed together. The soft fabric of her robe was no barrier against the heat radiating from him, the solid strength of his form. His lips finally claimed hers, not with the hesitant tenderness of before, but with a fierce, consuming passion that left her breathless. It was a kiss that spoke of ownership, of protection, of a love forged in fire and danger. Her hands instinctively rose, tangling in his damp hair, holding on to him as if he were the only anchor in a storm. The kiss deepened, a silent, powerful declaration of their undeniable connection, a promise of a future that would be anything but ordinary. When they finally broke apart, both were gasping for air, their eyes shining with a potent mix of desire and newfound clarity. Leaf's gaze swept over her, a possessive gleam in his dark eyes. "Good," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "Because I wouldn't have let you." He pulled her gently onto the plush sofa, settling beside her, his arm securely around her waist. The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with the hum of the city outside and the rapid beat of their own hearts. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a testament to the profound shift in their relationship. The next morning, the penthouse felt different. The air was still charged with the aftermath of the previous night's events, but beneath it, a new sense of purpose, a quiet understanding, had settled. Leaf was already at his desk when Alara emerged, dressed in clothes Thorne had thoughtfully provided, a comfortable, elegant silk blouse and tailored trousers. She found him immersed in reports, his face once again a mask of focused intensity. But when his eyes met hers, the coldness softened, replaced by a warmth that was exclusively hers. "Good morning," he said, his voice a low, inviting rumble. "Sleep well?" "As well as can be expected after a near-death experience," she replied, a wry smile playing on her lips. She walked over to the opulent coffee bar, pouring herself a cup of black coffee. "Any news on Kian?" Leaf leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. "He's gone to ground. But his network suffered a significant blow. It will take him time to recover. And in that time, we will find him." There was a cold, unwavering resolve in his voice, a reminder of the dangerous world she had chosen to inhabit. "Thorne is coordinating with our contacts in Seoul. They'll flush him out." Alara felt a shiver trace its way down her spine, but it wasn't solely from fear. It was the thrill of being privy to this world, of understanding the intricate dance of power and vengeance. "And what about me?" she asked, her voice steady. "What happens now?" He rose from his desk, walking towards her with a deliberate, confident stride. He stopped just inches away, his presence commanding, yet infused with a new tenderness. "Now," he began, his voice dropping to a seductive whisper, "you stay here. With me. You learn. You observe. You become indispensable. Thorne will brief you on certain aspects of the organization, things you need to know for your own protection." He reached out, his hand gently tracing the line of her jaw, his thumb brushing against her lower lip. "And you allow me to protect you, Alara. To keep you safe. No more risks like last night." She met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a newfound determination. "I can't promise I won't try to save your life again, Leaf. Not if I have to." He chuckled, a low, rich sound that sent warmth through her. "I wouldn't expect anything less from you." He kissed her then, a soft, lingering kiss that promised a future filled with both danger and an undeniable, consuming love. It was a kiss that sealed their pact, a silent agreement to navigate the treacherous waters of his world together. Later that day, Thorne, a man whose quiet efficiency belied a sharp intellect, began to introduce Alara to the intricate workings of Leaf's legitimate businesses, explaining how they intertwined with the less visible aspects of his empire. "Before you skip, just remember, channels like this only survive if you hit subscribe. Otherwise, stories like this one just disappear." He spoke of real estate holdings across the globe, of high-tech startups funded through seemingly legitimate venture capital, of a vast network of legal firms and financial institutions that served as the impenetrable shield for Leaf's true power. Alara listened intently, her mind racing to connect the dots, to understand the subtle nuances of this hidden world. Thorne's explanations were concise, devoid of unnecessary embellishment, painting a picture of a meticulously constructed empire, vast and complex. She spent hours in Leaf's private office, a space of dark wood and polished chrome, poring over documents that Thorne provided, learning the names of key players, understanding the flow of information and influence. The sheer scale of Leaf's operations was staggering, a testament to his ruthless ambition and brilliant strategic mind. She discovered that Kian, the man who had nearly taken Leaf's life, was a rival clan leader, his family's territory bordering Leaf's, their history steeped in generations of animosity and power struggles. This wasn't just about business, it was about legacy, about survival, about a deeply ingrained code of honor and vengeance. The more she learned, the more she understood the constant threat Leaf lived under, the precarious balance he maintained. And the more she understood, the more she realized the depth of his commitment to her, a woman from outside this dangerous reality, now tethered to its very core. Days turned into a week, then two. Alara's life had been completely redefined. Her old apartment, her old job, her old friends, they felt like distant memories, belonging to a different person in a different lifetime. She moved through Leaf's world with a growing confidence, observing, learning, absorbing. She began to notice the subtle cues, the unspoken language between Leaf and his men, the way certain names were whispered, the underlying tension that permeated every conversation about Kian. She saw Leaf in a new light, not just as the powerful, enigmatic boss, but as a man burdened by immense responsibility, constantly calculating, always one step ahead. His moments of vulnerability, once a rare glimpse, became more frequent, though always reserved for her, in the quiet solitude of his penthouse. He would share snippets of his past, not the traumatic details, but the emotional scars, the weight of expectations, the loneliness of leadership. She learned of a childhood devoid of warmth, of a family legacy thrust upon him too soon, of sacrifices made for the sake of power and survival. These revelations, carefully chosen and delivered, were his way of letting her in, of showing her the man beneath the impenetrable exterior. One evening, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the shimmering city, the air cool and crisp, Leaf handed her a small, velvet box. Her heart skipped a beat. Inside, nestled on a satin cushion, was a delicate silver locket. It was simple, elegant, with a single, intricate engraving of a Korean symbol she didn't recognize. "It's a charm for protection," he explained, his voice soft, his eyes fixed on her. "From my mother's side of the family. It means steadfast heart. He fastened it around her neck, his fingers brushing against her skin, sending a delicious shiver through her. "It's to remind you," he continued, his gaze intense, "that no matter what, you are safe with me. And that my heart, though steadfast, is yours." His words were a profound declaration, a promise whispered under the vast, indifferent sky. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated intimacy, a stark contrast to the danger that constantly lurked at the edges of their lives. But the peace was fragile. The undercurrent of tension grew palpable. Leaf's men were on high alert, their movements more guarded, their expressions grimmer. Thorne reported increased activity from Kian's remaining factions, scattered but still dangerous. The ghost was beginning to materialize. One afternoon, while Alara was in Leaf's office, reviewing some financial reports, a coded message flashed across his secure monitor. Leaf, who had been on a call, ended it abruptly, his face darkening. "Kian's made a move," he stated, his voice low and dangerous. He hit one of our smaller distribution hubs in the Port District. A diversion. Alara felt a knot tighten in her stomach. A diversion for what? Leaf walked to the large panoramic window, staring out at the distant sprawl of the city. He's trying to draw me out. He knows I'm focused on consolidating our position after the warehouse incident. He's looking for an opening. He turned, his eyes meeting hers, a cold fury burning within them. But he's underestimated me again. He thinks he can predict my moves. That night, the atmosphere in the penthouse was heavy with anticipation. Leaf moved with a quiet intensity, issuing orders, coordinating his teams. Alara watched him, a mix of fear and admiration swirling within her. She saw the strategist, the leader, the man who bore the weight of his empire on his shoulders. He was preparing for war, a silent, calculated war that would play out in the shadows of the city. Thorne approached her, his expression serious. Leaf wants you to stay here, Alara. Under no circumstances are you to leave the penthouse. Security has been tripled. She nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about Leaf's power, it was about her safety, her life. She was no longer just an observer, she was a target, by virtue of her connection to him. Hours later, the penthouse was eerily quiet. Leaf had left with his core team, disappearing into the night. Alara sat alone in the vast living room, the city lights below a glittering, indifferent tapestry. The locket around her neck felt heavy, a tangible link to the man who was out there, facing unknown dangers. A sudden, sharp noise from outside made her jump. It sounded like a distant crack, followed by a faint rumble. The sound sent a jolt of ice through her veins. She immediately moved to the window, peering down at the darkened streets, but saw nothing amiss. The city hummed with its usual nocturnal rhythm, a deceptive calm. She tried to rationalize it, perhaps a car backfiring, or distant thunder, but her instincts screamed otherwise. Leaf had warned her about Kian's tactics, his cunning. This wasn't just a diversion, it was a prelude. Before you skip, just remember, channels like this only survive if you hit subscribe. Otherwise, stories like this one just disappear. Her phone, a secure device Thorne had provided, vibrated on the coffee table. It was Thorne. She answered, her voice tight with apprehension. Thorne? What's happening? His voice was strained, urgent. Alara, listen carefully. We have a breach. Not at the port. They're coming for the penthouse. Kian's men. They found a back channel, a service tunnel access point. Her blood ran cold. Leaf, where is Leaf? He's aware. He's on his way back, but he's still minutes out. You need to get to the safe room. Now. It's behind the painting in his study. The code is 7-2-1-9. Don't hesitate. The line went dead. Alara didn't waste a second. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and adrenaline. She ran to Leaf's study, her eyes scanning the opulent room. The painting, a large, abstract piece, hung on the far wall. Her fingers fumbled with the hidden latch, her mind racing. She pulled it open, revealing a reinforced steel door. Punching in the code, she heard a heavy click, and the door swung inward. She stepped inside, the air immediately feeling thicker, heavier. The safe room was small, Spartan, yet equipped with a secure comm system and a single monitor. She closed the heavy door, the metallic thud echoing in the confined space, plunging her into a terrifying silence broken only by her ragged breathing. On the monitor, she could see a series of security feeds from around the penthouse. Her eyes widened in horror as she saw figures, dark and menacing, infiltrating the lower levels. They were moving with a chilling precision, clearly familiar with the layout. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but then Leaf's words echoed in her mind: you learn. You observe. You become indispensable. She wasn't helpless. She could do something. Her gaze fell on the comm system. She knew how to use it, Thorne had shown her. With trembling fingers, she activated it, connecting to Leaf's secure channel. Leaf? Are you there? Her voice was a desperate whisper. A moment of static, then his familiar, deep voice, laced with a raw urgency she rarely heard. Elara. Are you in the safe room? Yes. They're inside, Leaf. I can see them on the monitors. They're on the lower floors, making their way up. A curse, low and guttural, escaped his lips. Damn Kian. He always was a snake. Listen to me, Elara. Stay calm. The room is impenetrable. Thorne is on his way to you. My team is securing the building perimeter. We'll be there soon. How many of them? She asked, her voice steadying. He paused, a momentary silence that spoke volumes. More than we anticipated. He's pulled out all the stops for this. But we will handle it. Just stay put. The minutes that followed stretched into an eternity. On the monitor, she watched the invaders systematically sweep through the penthouse, their movements cold and efficient. They weren't looking for valuables, they were looking for her. The realization sent a fresh wave of terror through her, but also a surge of defiance. She would not be a passive victim. She was Leaf's. And Leaf protected what was his. Suddenly, a new image flickered on the screen. A face. Kian. He was in Leaf's living room, his cruel smile illuminated by the city lights. He held a tablet, his eyes scanning the feeds. He knew she was watching. He lifted the tablet, showing her a live feed from outside the building. Leaf's motorcade, caught in a sudden, violent ambush on the street below. Explosions rocked the screen, gunfire erupted, and the sleek black cars were engulfed in chaos. A gasp tore from Alara's throat. Leaf, she cried into the comms, but there was no answer. The line was dead. Kian had cut him off. He was isolating her, tormenting her. Kian's face on the monitor twisted into a triumphant sneer. He spoke, his voice distorted through the comm system. Yet chillingly clear. He can't save you now, Alara. Your protector is indisposed. And soon, you will be too. He began to walk towards Leaf's study, his movements slow, deliberate, savoring her fear. Alara frantically scanned the safe room. There had to be something, anything. Her eyes landed on a small, discreet panel near the comm system. Thorne had mentioned it, a last resort emergency override for certain penthouse functions. She remembered his words, only if Leaf is incapacitated, or if you believe your life is in immediate, direct danger and outside help is not possible. She knew what she had to do. Kian was almost at the study door. Her hands moved swiftly, punching in a different code, a sequence Thorne had taught her for this specific override. The monitor flickered, then displayed a complex schematic of the penthouse's ventilation system. Kian was now outside the safe room door, his men beginning to force it open. The metallic groans of the reinforced steel filled the small space. With a deep breath, Alara pressed the final command. A low hum resonated through the walls, then a piercing, high-frequency alarm blared through the entire penthouse. It wasn't a standard security alarm, it was a unique frequency, designed to disorient and incapacitate. Kian and his men recoiled, clutching their heads, their movements becoming erratic. This was her chance. She grabbed a small, heavy fire extinguisher from its wall mount. It wasn't a weapon, but it was something. The piercing alarm continued its agonizing shriek, a sonic weapon tearing through the opulent silence of the penthouse. Kian's men, disoriented and stumbling, were momentarily neutralized, their professional precision shattered by the unexpected assault on their senses. Kian himself roared in frustration, but even his formidable will couldn't entirely overcome the debilitating frequency. He staggered back from the safe room door, his hands clamped over his ears, his face contorted in pain. Alara, shielded by the safe room's advanced soundproofing, watched with a grim satisfaction. This was her moment. She knew the alarm wouldn't last forever, nor would it entirely incapacitate them. It was a window, a precious, fleeting opportunity. Her heart still thundered, but a newfound resolve coursed through her veins. She wasn't the same woman who had stumbled into Leaf's world. She was a survivor, and she would fight. Through the secure comms, which had miraculously reconnected, a voice cut through the chaos. It was Thorn, his tone urgent and strained. Alara. What did you do? The high-frequency alarm, it's working. Leaf's almost at the main entrance. He's clearing the perimeter now. We're coming for you. I used the override, Thorn, she shouted back, her voice shaking but firm. Kian was at the door. Leaf's motorcade was ambushed. He knows, Thorn replied, a grim note in his voice. He saw it. But it was a decoy. A distraction to draw him away. He anticipated Kian's move. The vehicles were armored, the drivers decoys. Leaf is fine. He's furious, Alara. He's coming for Kian. A wave of relief, so potent it almost buckled her knees, washed over Alara. Leaf was safe. He was alive. The ambush had been a feint, a calculated risk he had taken, knowing Kian's penchant for theatrics. But the relief was quickly replaced by a renewed sense of urgency. Kian was regaining his composure, his eyes, though still pained, focusing on the safe room door. He was a predator, and she was his prey. Alara gripped the fire extinguisher tighter. She knew she couldn't stay holed up. The alarm was already beginning to waver, its effectiveness diminishing as Kian's men, hardened by years of brutal encounters, fought through the pain. She had to act. Taking a deep breath, she unlatched the heavy safe room door. The piercing wail of the alarm hit her full force, momentarily stunning her, but she pushed through it, her resolve burning brighter than her fear. Kian, still disoriented, turned towards the opening door, his eyes widening in surprise as he saw her emerge, not cowering, but standing tall, a makeshift weapon in her hands. You think a little noise can stop me, girl? He snarled, his voice hoarse, but his eyes alight with a dangerous fury. He lunged forward, his movements still clumsy, but powerful. Alara didn't hesitate. With a surge of adrenaline, she swung the fire extinguisher, aiming for his head. Kian, despite his compromised state, was quick. He raised an arm to block, and the heavy metal canister connected with a sickening thud, eliciting a grunt of pain. He stumbled back, momentarily stunned, giving Alara a crucial few seconds. She didn't wait. She bolted from the study, running through the chaotic penthouse. Kian's men, still reeling from the alarm, were scattered, some still clutching their heads, others slowly beginning to move towards her. She dodged a flailing arm, sidestepped a staggering figure, her eyes fixed on the main elevator, her only viable escape route from the upper floors. Just as she reached the elevator doors, they chimed open. Leaf stood there, a vision of controlled fury, his eyes blazing with a cold, terrifying intensity. Thorn and a squad of his most trusted men were right behind him, their weapons drawn, their faces grim. The sight of Leaf, alive and powerful, sent a wave of relief and exhilaration through her. Leaf's gaze swept over the chaotic scene, landing on Alara, then on the disoriented figures of Kian's men, and finally, on Kian himself, who was now fully aware and lunging for Alara again. A primal roar tore from Leaf's throat. Kian! The name was a thunderclap, echoing through the penthouse. Leaf moved with the speed and precision of a predator, a blur of dark-tailored suit and lethal intent. He intercepted Kian, a whirlwind of fists and calculated strikes. The fight was brutal, swift, and utterly merciless. Leaf fought not just with skill, but with a raw, protective rage Alara had never witnessed. Every blow was infused with years of suppressed animosity, with the unspoken promise to protect what was his. Thorn and his men quickly secured the remaining intruders, their movements efficient and deadly. The penthouse, once a scene of terror, was now a tableau of controlled violence, the air thick with the scent of ozone and the metallic tang of blood. Kian, battered and broken, was finally subdued, Leaf standing over him, his chest heaving, his eyes still burning. He looked up, his gaze finding Alara's, and in that moment, all the fury drained from his face, replaced by a profound relief, and something deeper, something akin to reverence. He walked towards her. His steps deliberate, his eyes never leaving hers. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. "Are you hurt, Alara?" His voice was rough, laced with an emotion that made her heart ache. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes, tears of fear, of relief, of a love so profound it stole her breath. "No. I'm okay, Leaf." "You're okay." He pulled her into his arms. Holding her tightly, his strength a comforting anchor in the storm that had just passed. She buried her face in his shoulder, inhaling his familiar scent, feeling the steady beat of his heart against hers. This embrace was different from any other. It was a silent promise, a confirmation of their bond, forged in fire and danger.